Guardsman Theron Mast died 3 times before the Painboy decided he was worth keeping alive. The first death came when the orc chopper split his leg open from thigh to ankle, the crude blade catching bone and grinding through it with the sound of meat being processed in an industrial grinder. He remembered falling, the red dust of Verdus Prime rising around him like a crimson fog, his squad still firing their laser guns into the green tide that swept across the agri-fields with all the subtlety of a tectonic event. The pain was white and absolute, erasing thought, erasing everything except the awareness that his body had been reduced to a single point of agony, centered somewhere below his hip. The second death happened when he tried to crawl away from the advancing orcs and realized his hands were slipping in his own blood, that the leg was not just wounded, but ruined, trailing behind him like a broken puppet limb, the bones showing white through torn flesh and shredded uniform. He screamed then, not words but animal sounds, the kind of noise that comes from a place deeper than language, and an orc boy stepped over him without looking down, too focused on chasing the last survivors of his squad toward the burning grain silos at the edge of the settlement. The third death was quieter, more final, the moment when blood loss and shock combined to pull him down into darkness. And he stopped fighting, stopped caring, let go of the small, desperate hope that had kept him conscious through the first 2 deaths. This was the death that should have stuck, the one that should have ended Guardsman Theron Mast's service to the Emperor and spared him what came after. But the universe has never been kind to soldiers, and on this particular day, it chose to be exceptionally cruel. He woke to the sensation of being dragged, his broken leg bumping over rocks and debris, each impact sending fresh lightning through his nervous system. His eyes opened to see the dusty ground sliding past, the boot prints of orcs pressed into earth still wet with human blood. Someone, something, was pulling him by his webbing, hauling him like a sack of grain or a piece of salvage. He tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but his mouth produced only a dry croak, his tongue thick and useless in a mouth that tasted of copper and dirt. The orc that had grabbed him was smaller than the warriors who had overrun the defensive positions, but still massive by human standards, its skin the color of old moss, its eyes small and red and gleaming with an intelligence that should not exist in something so brutal and crude. It wore a blood-stained apron over rusted armor plates, and from its belt hung tools that Theron recognized with growing horror as medical implements, saws and clamps and needles, all sized for hands much larger than human, all covered in dried blood and other substances he could not identify. Behind this creature came 2 smaller greenskins, Gretchen he remembered from the briefing materials, each carrying bags and boxes that clanked and rattled with every step. One of them looked at Theron and grinned, showing teeth filed to points, and made a gesture across its own throat that needed no translation. The other just giggled, a high-pitched sound that cut through the battlefield noise like broken glass through silk. The orc in the apron, the one dragging him, turned its head and looked down at Theron with what might have been professional interest, the way a butcher might examine a side of beef or a mechanic might assess a broken engine. It spoke in low Gothic so badly mangled that Theron needed several seconds to parse the words from the guttural sounds. "Dis one's still wiggling. Good, good. Gonna learn lots from dis squishy humie. Yeah, lots of good learning." The creature's enthusiasm was genuine and somehow worse than anger would have been. This was not hatred or battle fury, but the eager anticipation of someone about to begin work they genuinely enjoyed. They dragged him through the ruins of the settlement, past bodies of his comrades who had not been lucky enough to interest the Painboy, past burning buildings and smashed equipment and all the casual wreckage that orcs left in their wake. The sounds of battle were fading now, moving away as the main orc force pursued the survivors toward the planetary defense bunkers 10 kilometers east. What remained behind was the cleanup crew, the scavengers and specialists who sorted through what the warriors had broken, looking for anything useful or interesting or entertaining. The Painboy's workshop occupied what had been the settlement's medici station, a low concrete building that had probably treated farming injuries and minor illnesses until 3 hours ago when the orcs had kicked in the doors and claimed it for their own purposes. Inside, the transformation was already complete. The clean white walls now splattered with blood and other fluids, the medical equipment pushed into corners or torn apart for components. And in the center of the main room, a collection of operating tables that had been dragged from various sources and arranged in a rough semicircle. On these tables lay the Painboy's other patients, orcs mostly, warriors who had taken damage during the assault and needed repairs their natural healing could not manage. One was missing an arm, the stump already starting to regenerate, but too slowly for whatever schedule the orc army maintained. Another had taken a plasma burst to the face, leaving half its skull exposed and one eye socket empty, but it was still breathing, still occasionally twitching, its remaining eye rolling in its socket as it tracked movement around the room. A third table held something that might have been human once, but the modifications were so extensive that identifying the original species required more attention than Theron could spare. His mind kept trying to slide away from what he was seeing, kept insisting that this could not be real, that soldiers did not get captured and modified and kept alive through procedures that should kill anything with a functional nervous system. The Gretchen assistant scurried ahead, clearing space on an empty table, shoving aside tools and discarded pieces of what Theron hoped was orc biology, but suspected might not be. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly having done this many times before, anticipating what their master would need, preparing the workspace the way surgical assistants in an actual hospital might prepare for an actual doctor. The parallel was almost worse than if they had simply thrown him down and started cutting. The implication that this was normal, routine, just another day's work in the orc medical profession. The Painboy lifted Theron onto the table with one hand, the casual display of strength somehow more frightening than the visible weapons hanging from its belt. Up close, the creature smelled of blood and chemicals and something organic and rotting that made Theron's stomach clench. Its breath, when it leaned in to examine him, carried the scent of meat and fungus, the exhalation of something that was not quite alive in any way humans understood the term. "Right then," the Painboy said, its voice carrying that strange mix of enthusiasm and clinical detachment. "Let's see what we got here. Yeah, Humi soldier Fing, all puny and squishy. Got a nice big hurt on the leg. That's good. That's real good. Means I can fix it proper. Maybe add some bits. Make it better than before. Yeah. The creature's hands, each finger thick as Theron's wrist, began probing his wounded leg with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with their size, pressing around the injury, pulling back shredded cloth and armor plates, examining the damage with what appeared to be genuine medical curiosity. The pain that had faded to a dull roar during the dragging suddenly sharpened again as those huge fingers explored the wound, and Theron heard himself making noises, not quite screams, but close, sounds that came from somewhere deep in his chest where fear and agony mixed into something beyond either. The Painboy ignored these sounds completely, continuing its examination with the focus of someone truly interested in their work, occasionally making small grunts of satisfaction or disappointment as it discovered various aspects of the injury. One of the Gretchen appeared at the Painboy's elbow with a tray of instruments, and Theron got his first clear look at what orcs considered medical tools. They called them stabby bits, according to the intelligence briefings, and the name was horrifyingly accurate. Metal rods with sharpened ends, crude saws with teeth like mountains, clamps that looked more like torture devices than surgical equipment, and needles, emperor above the needles, syringes the size of small bottles with needles as thick as pencils and rusty with substances he could not identify. "Gonna need to open it up," the Painboy announced to no one in particular, selecting a blade from the tray with the care of a chef choosing a knife. "See what's broke inside, yeah. All the squishy bits and hard bits. Gotta know what needs fixing before I can fix it proper. That's just good doc work, that is." The blade gleamed in the harsh light of the workshop, its edge showing recent sharpening despite the rust stains along its length. Theron found his voice then, cracked and weak but human. "Please, no. Just kill me. Please, I can't do this." The words tumbled out without dignity or courage, raw terror speaking through him, and he was not ashamed. Any soldier who faced this without fear was either lying or insane. The Painboy looked at him then, really looked at him, and in those small red eyes, Theron saw something that might have been curiosity, or might have been confusion. "Kill ya? Why'd I kill ya? You're broke, not dead. Broke things get fixed. That's how it works. Can't learn nothing from dead things. Gotta keep you wiggling so I can see if me work is good. Yeah, makes sense that does. You'll see. Gonna be much better after I fix you up proper." The logic was orc logic, alien and absolute, and completely divorced from any concept of mercy or patient rights or medical ethics as humans understood such things. To this creature, Theron was not a person, but a project, a broken thing that needed fixing, and the fact that fixing might hurt the thing being fixed was simply not relevant to the discussion. Pain was data, screaming was feedback, the patient's suffering was just part of the diagnostic process. The blade came down before Theron could protest further, not cutting but slicing, opening the wound further with a precision that should not be possible with such crude instruments in such massive hands. The pain was immediate and total, wiping out thought, wiping out everything except the fact that his leg was being opened like a piece of machinery being disassembled for repair. He screamed then, properly screamed, the sound filling the workshop and echoing off the blood-stained walls, and somewhere in the background he heard the Gretchen laughing, placing bets in their squeaky voices on how long he would last before passing out. The Painboy worked with total focus, peeling back layers of muscle and tissue, occasionally making pleased sounds when it found something particularly interesting. "Ooh, look at dat, all the stringy bits holding the hard bits together. Real clever, dat. No wonder you humies break so easy though, all squishy, no proper protection. Gonna have to fix dat. Yeah, add some reinforcement, make it proper strong." The running commentary continued throughout the procedure, the Painboy apparently talking itself through the work, explaining its findings and plans to an audience that included 2 giggling Gretchen, several unconscious orcs, and 1 human who was rapidly losing his grip on consciousness. One of the Gretchen handed the Painboy something from the tray, and Theron caught a glimpse of the earthy syringe, the massive needle that intelligence reports mentioned as standard orc medical equipment. The liquid inside was green and thick, moving sluggishly inside the metal cylinder, and he knew without being told that whatever this substance was, it had not been created with human physiology in mind. "Right, this'll keep you from dying," the Painboy explained with what might have been meant as reassurance. "Can't fix you if you die, so gotta pump you full of good stuff. Keep all your squishy bits working while I work on the broke bits. Simple, really. Dunno why you humies don't do it this way." The needle went into Theron's arm with about as much subtlety as a fence post, the plunger depressing, forcing that green substance into his bloodstream, and for several seconds nothing happened, and then everything happened at once. His body rejected the injection immediately and completely, every cell recognizing the intrusion as alien and wrong and fundamentally incompatible with human biology. His temperature spiked, his heart rate accelerated to dangerous levels. His vision went red around the edges, and somewhere in his chest something felt like it was tearing loose from its moorings. He convulsed once, twice, every muscle locking up simultaneously, his back arching off the table hard enough to crack his spine if the Gretchen had not been there to hold him down. And then, impossibly, it stabilized. The foreign substance found some kind of terrible equilibrium with his own chemistry, not integrating exactly, but forming a kind of truce, a temporary ceasefire between human biology and orc medical science. His heart rate dropped back to something almost normal, his vision cleared, and the pain in his leg, which had been absolutely overwhelming, faded to something merely unbearable. The earthy syringe was a stimulant and a coagulant, and probably a dozen other things humans had no names for, keeping him conscious and alive through procedures that should kill through shock alone. The Painboy watched this process with obvious satisfaction, nodding its massive head. See? Knew it'd work. Works on orcs all daytime, figured Humies is close enough. Both got to squishy bits and a pumpy thing into chest. Basic stuff, really. Now we can get to the proper work. Yeah, the real fixin'. It returned its attention to the opened wound, selecting new instruments from the tray, preparing to begin the actual repair work. What followed existed outside of time in Theron's memory, a sequence of events that might have lasted minutes or hours, impossible to measure, impossible to endure, except that he had no choice. The Painboy worked with genuine skill despite the crude tools, its massive fingers surprisingly dexterous as they stitched muscle back together using something that looked like wire but moved like living tissue, clamping broken bones in place with metal splints that it seemed to be fabricating on the spot from scrap materials pulled from the Gretchen's bags. But the procedure kept getting interrupted by the Painboy's natural orc distractibility. Halfway through reconnecting a severed artery, it paused to examine Theron's knee joint, fascinated by the way human leg bones connected, prodding and pulling at tendons to watch how they moved, apparently conducting a small anatomy lesson on a patient who was very much alive and aware. Then it noticed his appendix, or rather the scar where it had been removed years ago during basic training, and spent several minutes trying to find the organ, convinced it must be hiding somewhere, before one of the Gretchen reminded it about the original injury. Right, Darleg. Gotta finish day leg, the Painboy muttered, but its gaze kept drifting to other parts of Theron's anatomy, seeing new problems to fix or new modifications to make, its enthusiasm for experimentation clearly warring with any sense of medical procedure or priority. That arm looks puny, though. Real puny. Humie arms always so weak. No good for proper crumpin'. Maybe we fix that next. Yeah, give it some proper strength. Make it useful, like. Theron tried to protest, but his voice came out as a croak, the green substance in his system keeping him conscious, but apparently not particularly articulate. The Painboy took this as agreement, or more likely simply did not care about patient consent, already turning to shout at one of the Gretchen. Oi, get me one of the spare arms from the box, the good one with the grabby bits, whom is gonna need an upgrade. The Gretchen scurried off and returned moments later, dragging something that made Theron's already stressed mind try to shut down completely in self-defense. It was a bionic arm, but calling it that was like calling a volcano a campfire. Technically accurate, but fundamentally inadequate to describe the reality. The thing was huge, clearly designed for an orc, cobbled together from scrap metal and mechanical components that had been welded and bolted into something that approximated a functional limb. It had too many joints, some pointing in directions arms should not point, and at the end where a hand should be was a collection of clamps and grippers and what appeared to be a pipe wrench welded directly to the structure. And was that a horn? Yes. Mounted on the forearm, a small horn like something from a vehicle, apparently installed for no reason Theron could fathom. Perfect, this'll work great. Just gotta attach it proper. Real simple, done it loads of times. Watch and learn, yeah, watch and learn. The Painboy reached for Theron's left arm, his good arm, the one that was not injured and did not need any kind of attention whatsoever. Wait, no, my leg, you are fixing my leg. The arm is fine, the arm does not need. Please, please listen to me. The words came out garbled but clear enough, and the Painboy paused, looking down at Theron with what might have been confusion or might have been annoyance at being interrupted. What? Oh, right, da leg, forgot about that. Been thinking about da arm, though. Da arm needs work. Arm's too puny. Gotta be fixed. The logic was orc logic again, pure and simple. If something seemed like it could be improved, then it should be improved, regardless of whether it needed improvement, regardless of what the owner of the body part thought about the matter. But I came in for the leg. Theron tried again, clinging to rationality in a situation where rationality had abandoned the building hours ago. Just the leg. Just fix the leg and we are done. I will be fixed. You will have fixed me. Successful medical procedure. The Painboy seemed to actually consider this, its small red eyes narrowing in thought. Then it shrugged, a gesture so human and so casual that it was somehow more disturbing than anything else it had done. Yeah, but arm, though. Arm's more interesting. Leg's almost done anyway. Basic work, dat. But de arm's got problems. Can see it from here. Too weak, no proper strength, gonna snap if you try to hit something hard. Nah. Gotta fix it. Wouldn't be a proper doc if I left it all broke like dat. The fact that the arm was not broken, had never been broken, was functioning perfectly fine as arms go, seemed entirely irrelevant to the discussion. In the Painboy's mind, human arms were fundamentally flawed by design, too weak and too small and lacking in proper mechanical augmentation, and fixing this design flaw was just good medical practice. The fact that the patient had not asked for this fix and in fact was actively begging for it not to happen simply did not factor into the decision-making process. One of the Gretchen appeared with a saw, a proper bone saw, and Theron understood with absolute clarity what was about to happen. They were going to remove his arm, his functional, healthy, necessary arm, and replace it with that monstrosity of metal and violence. And there was nothing he could do to stop them. No appeal he could make that would penetrate the orc's absolute certainty that this was helping, that this was good medicine, that this was what a proper Painboy should do. The saw's teeth bit into his shoulder with a sensation beyond pain, beyond anything his nervous system was designed to process. The green substance in his bloodstream kept him awake through it, kept his body functioning even as his mind tried desperately to escape into unconsciousness or insanity or any state that did not include the awareness of his own arm being removed while he watched. The Painboy worked with frightening efficiency now, no longer distracted, focused entirely on the amputation, cutting through muscle and bone with practiced ease, occasionally pausing to cauterize a bleeding vessel with a tool that looked like it had been designed to repair machinery rather than living tissue. The arm came free with a wet sound that Theron would hear in nightmares for the rest of his life, and the Painboy held it up to the light, examining it with professional interest. Yeah, see? Told ya. All puny and weak, no good for proper fighting, you'll be much better with a new one. Trust me, I'm a doc, I know these things. It tossed the arm aside like garbage. The limb that had served Theron for 26 years, dismissed as inferior materials, and reached for the bionic replacement. Attaching the bionic was somehow worse than removing the original. The metal frame had to be anchored directly to his shoulder bone, which meant drilling. Actual drilling with a power tool that squealed and smoked as it bored holes into his skeleton. The pain was white noise by this point, a constant background scream that his mind had given up trying to process, and he found himself focusing on small details instead. The rust patterns on the ceiling, the way one of the Gretchen had blood on its pointed teeth, the sound of another patient somewhere nearby making wet gurgling noises that might have been breathing or might have been dying. The Painboy bolted the arm into place with all the delicacy of someone assembling furniture, metal screws driven directly into bone, welds applied to fuse flesh and machine, some kind of adhesive or bonding agent that burned where it touched organic tissue. The bionic was comically oversized on Theron's frame, designed for someone 3 times his weight, and it hung from his shoulder like a piece of industrial equipment rather than a body part. Heavy and graceless and fundamentally wrong. Right, now for day connections. Gotta wire up day control things so your brain can talk to day arm. Proper, basic stuff. Watch. This is the clever part. The Painboy produced what looked like a bundle of wire, but the wires moved. twitching and flexing like small snakes, and Theron realized with horror that they were biological nerves or something similar, grown or bred for this exact purpose. The creature began threading these through his shoulder, connecting them to his existing nervous system with no anesthetic, and apparently no concern for the fact that every insertion felt like being struck by lightning. When it was done, when the final connection was made, the arm suddenly came to life. The fingers, clamps, whatever they were, all moving at once, opening and closing randomly, the elbow bending in directions that should not be possible. And the horn, Emperor, save him the horn, honked once, loud and discordant, the sound of a joke being played by a universe with a very mean sense of humor. Ha! Works perfect. I knew it. I'm a genius, I am. Best doc in the whole wa. The Painboy capered in place, genuinely delighted with its work, while Theron tried and failed to make any sense of the signals coming from his new limb. It was like trying to control someone else's arm by shouting instructions through a wall. Technically possible, but requiring levels of coordination and practice he simply did not have. The Gretchen were cackling now, taking new bets, apparently wagering on how long before Theron accidentally hit himself with his own bionic. And they did not have to wait long. When he tried to raise his hand to his face, the arm moved too far and too fast, the metal fingers clipping his ear hard enough to draw blood, and when he tried to correct the motion, he overcompensated and nearly broke his own nose. The horn honked again at some random movement, and even the Painboy laughed at that, a deep booming sound that shook the workshop. Gonna need practice with that, yeah, but you'll get it. All me patients get it eventually, or they die trying, one or the other. The Painboy returned its attention to Theron's leg, which it had apparently forgotten about during the excitement of the arm installation. Right, where was we? Oh yeah, nearly done with the leg. Just gotta finish up the stitching. It produced something from one of the Gretchen's bags that made Theron's already stressed mind consider just giving up entirely. Squigs, small ones, each about the size of a thumb with tiny teeth and an apparently endless appetite for meat. These were mending squigs, according to the intelligence briefings, living sutures that would stitch flesh together by biting and holding, their teeth sharp enough to pierce skin, but their bite not deep enough to cause significant damage. In theory. The Painboy began applying these creatures to the wound in his leg, placing them along the edges of the cut, and each one latched on immediately, biting into flesh on both sides of the incision and pulling it closed. The sensation was like being stitched shut with pins made of malice and hunger, each squig a small point of agony that added to the overall tapestry of suffering that Theron's existence had become. But they worked. Emperor above, they actually worked, holding the wound closed better than any human suture, already beginning the process of healing even as they caused fresh pain. There, leg's done. Proper job dat. Won't even have a scar. Well, except for the metal bits. But dose look good? Show everyone you've been to a real doc. Yeah, everyone will be well jealous. The Painboy stepped back to admire its work, and Theron forced himself to look down at his leg at what had been done to him. The limb was no longer entirely human. Metal plates had been welded directly to the bone in places where the structure had been too damaged to repair otherwise. Strips of some kind of synthetic muscle augmented the organic tissue, and running the length of the shin was a thick cable that pulsed with what might have been hydraulic fluid or might have been something biological, impossible to tell. It looked like something built in a factory, like a prototype for a new kind of soldier, like something that should not be attached to a human body, but nevertheless was. But the Painboy was not done. Its eyes gleaming with that dangerous light that meant it had more ideas, more improvements, more ways to fix things that were not broken. You know what, though? The head looks a bit squishy, bit vulnerable, like one good hit and splat. No more Hume. We should probably reinforce that. Yeah, just a little plate. Won't hurt much. No, no more. Please, I cannot. I cannot take any more. The leg is fixed. The arm is fixed. I am fixed. All fixed. Good work. Excellent work. You have fixed me." Theron was begging now without shame or dignity, his voice hoarse from screaming, his mind starting to fracture under the weight of pain and terror, and the green chemicals keeping him conscious through it all. The Painboy considered this, head tilted to one side in thought. True, done a lot of work on ya. Might be enough for now, but could do just one more little thing, just real quick. Won't take long at all, promise." Before Theron could protest further, the creature had selected a piece of metal from a pile of scrap, a plate roughly the size of a hand, and approached with what looked like a welding torch in one hand and a bottle of something caustic in the other. "This'll protect your thinky bits. Real important dat. Can't crump proper if your skull gets cracked." The Painboy poured the caustic substance directly onto Theron's head, and the pain was immediate and absolute, burning away hair and skin, exposing bone beneath, and before Theron could even process this new horror, the metal plate was being pressed into place and the welding torch was active, fusing metal directly to skull, the heat and smell of burning bone filling the workshop. Theron screamed through this, or tried to. His voice had given out somewhere in the previous hour, or hours, or however long this had been going on, and what came from his throat was more like a wheeze than a scream. But the Painboy ignored it anyway, working with quick efficiency, apparently trying to finish before its patient died, or passed out, or simply broke beyond repair. The welding completed, the Painboy stepped back again, this time truly finished, looking at Theron the way an artist might look at a completed sculpture. "There, all fixed up proper. Much better than before. Stronger, tougher, ready for some real fighting. I've done good work on ya. Best work I've done in days, maybe weeks. You should be grateful. Most humies don't survive this long. Shows you're made of good stuff, tough stuff." Theron tried to respond, but his body was shutting down. The accumulated trauma and chemical stress and blood loss and sheer psychological horror finally overwhelming even the orc medicines keeping him functional. His vision was tunneling. Sound was becoming muffled and distant, and he welcomed it, welcomed the darkness, welcomed any escape from consciousness and what consciousness meant in his current situation. The last thing he heard before passing out was the Painboy shouting to the Gretchen, "Put this one into recovery corner. Wanna see if me work holds up. If it does, I'll do the whole process on day next humie we catch. Perfected the technique I have. Gonna be famous for this." And then, nothing. Just blessed nothing. The darkness taking him down into unconsciousness where pain could not follow, and modifications meant nothing, and the horror of what had been done to him existed in some distant place he did not have to think about. He woke to agony. This was not surprising. Agony had become his normal state. But this was a new kind, the specific pain of modified flesh trying to adapt to foreign materials, of nerves firing incorrect signals, of systems trying and failing to operate in coordination. His leg felt like it was made of hot iron, the bionic arm hung from his shoulder like a dead weight, and the metal plate on his head was conducting heat from somewhere, making his skull feel like it was cooking his brain slowly. He was in a corner of the workshop, dumped on a pile of what might have been blankets or might have been old rags stained with fluids he did not want to identify. Other patients, if that was the right word, lay nearby in various states of consciousness and modification, their conditions ranging from mostly human with minor alterations to barely recognizable as having once been any known species. One of them, another human, he thought, looked at him with eyes that held no recognition of their shared humanity, just blank acceptance of whatever had been done to them, the gaze of someone who had stopped fighting, stopped caring, stopped being anything except a collection of parts held together by orc medical science. The Painboy was across the room working on a new patient, an orc this time, replacing what looked like a damaged jaw with something that had too many teeth and moved with hydraulic hisses. The Gretchen assistants scurried about their duties, one of them pausing to look at Theron and make a throat-cutting gesture before dissolving into giggles and continuing its work. The sounds of the workshop continued, bone saws and drills and welding torches, screams and mechanical noises, and the Painboy's running commentary, a symphony of suffering that never seemed to pause or rest. Theron tried to move, to take stock of his new condition, and immediately regretted the attempt. The bionic arm responded to his command, but not in any way he intended, swinging wide and crashing into the wall beside him, the impact hard enough to crack concrete. The pipe wrench attachment apparently activated by some thought he did not remember having, and the horn, the damned horn, honked again, drawing attention from across the room. "Oi, Dahumi's awake. Look at that. Survived the procedure, knew me work was good. Told ya. Told all of ya." The Painboy sounded genuinely proud, like a craftsman receiving validation for quality work, and it started toward Theron with what might have been meant as a friendly expression, but looked more like a predator approaching prey. Theron tried to speak, to ask questions about what happened next, about whether he would be kept here or killed or simply left in this corner to die slowly. But his voice was still not working properly, coming out as barely a whisper. The Painboy leaned down close, its massive face filling Theron's vision, its breath carrying that smell of meat and rot and something mechanical. "You did good, Humie. Real good. Most of your Humies died during the first modifications, but not you. Nah, you're tough stuff. Gonna make a good test case for future procedures. Gonna keep you around. See how well the work holds up. See if I need to make any adjustments. Maybe add some more bits if you survive long enough. Got loads of ideas for improvements. Yeah, loads and loads." The creature patted Theron's shoulder with what was probably meant to be reassuring gentleness, but felt like being hit with a hammer. And then it returned to its current patient, leaving Theron alone with his modifications and his pain and his terror. Hours passed, or days. Time had stopped meaning anything concrete, marked only by the arrival of new patients and the removal of old ones, by the cycle of screaming and silence, by the gradual realization that he was, somehow impossibly, adapting to what had been done to him. The bionic arm began responding more reliably, his brain finding the proper pathways to control the foreign limb, though the pipe wrench continued to deploy at random moments and the horn still honked whenever it felt like it. The leg was healing, or doing something like healing, the metal and flesh fusing in ways that should not be possible but apparently were when orc medicine was involved. He discovered he could stand, though his balance was completely wrong, the bionic arm throwing off his center of gravity, the reinforced leg responding to commands with more strength than he intended. When he tried to walk, it was more like controlled falling, each step a small crisis requiring total concentration, and halfway across the room he accidentally activated the leg's spring mechanism, something he had not known existed until that moment, and found himself launched 2 meters into the air before crashing down onto his face, the impact absorbed mostly by the metal plate on his head, which rang like a bell and left him seeing stars. The Gretchen thought this was the funniest thing they had ever witnessed, falling over each other in their amusement, pointing and cackling and making gestures he did not need translated. Even the Painboy looked over and laughed, that deep, booming sound. "Yeah, forgot to mention the spring. Added that for extra jumpin'. Thought it'd be useful. Gotta learn to control it, though. Practice makes perfect. Keep trying. Y'all get it eventually." Eventually. The word carried implications Theron was not ready to consider, the suggestion that this was his existence now, that he would be here for an undefined period, a test case for orc medical procedures, a living demonstration of what could be done when surgery was performed without patient consent or medical ethics or any regard for human dignity. He was neither human nor orc, neither dead nor truly alive. Just fixed, permanently fixed in ways that could never be unfixed, modifications that would mark him forever as something wrong, something changed, something other. More patients came and went, orcs mostly, but sometimes humans, occasionally xenos of species Theron did not recognize, all receiving the Painboy's enthusiastic attention, all modified and repaired and improved according to orc medical philosophy. Some survived, some did not. The Painboy seemed equally interested in both outcomes, learning from success and failure with equal enthusiasm, constantly refining its techniques, constantly pushing the boundaries of what bodies could endure and still function. Theron watched all of this from his corner, too damaged to escape, too modified to simply die, too stubborn or too broken or too something to give up entirely. The other modified humans, the ones who had been here longer, told him in whispers that sometimes the Painboy got bored with test subjects and either killed them or sold them to other orcs as oddities or curiosities. This was meant to be encouraging, the promise of eventual release, even if that release came in the form of death. But Theron found no comfort in it. Death had stopped seeming like an escape and started seeming like just another thing that would happen to him without his input or control. The breakthrough came on what Theron estimated was day 3, though it might have been day 2 or day 5. His sense of time completely destroyed by pain and chemicals and the constant noise of the workshop. He was practicing with the bionic arm, trying to control the pipe wrench, when he managed something he had thought impossible. He closed his metal fingers around a piece of scrap metal and, by concentrating very hard on the specific kind of grip he wanted, crushed it flat without activating any of the arm's other functions. The simple act of controlling his own limb, of making it do what he wanted instead of what it randomly decided to do, was so unexpected and so profound that he almost cried. Not because it was good, nothing about this situation was good, but because it proved something important, proved that he was not entirely at the mercy of what had been done to him, that adaptation was possible even under these circumstances, that some small measure of control could be reclaimed from the chaos. The Painboy noticed this and came over immediately, excited by any development in its test subjects. "Ooh, look at that, working the arm proper now. Told you you'd get it. Just needed practice. Now you got proper strength, can crump things real good with that. Much better than the puny original." The creature's enthusiasm was genuine and somehow made everything worse. The idea that this was success, that this was the intended outcome, that everything Theron had suffered through was just the necessary price of improvement. "Can I leave?" Theron asked, surprising himself with the question, not having planned to speak but the words coming out anyway. "The modifications are working. I have adapted. The procedure is a success. Can I leave now?" The Painboy tilted its head, considering. "Leave? Why'd you leave?" "Got plenty more procedures to try, loads of improvements still to make. You're just getting started. Got a whole list of modifications I want to test. Special ones for humies. See what works and what don't. You're too valuable to let go. Yeah, much too valuable. Best test subject I've had in years." The answer was delivered without malice. Just simple honesty. The Painboy genuinely saw Theron as a resource, a tool for advancing medical science, orc style, and the idea that this tool might have opinions about its use simply did not register as relevant. The despair that hit Theron then was colder and deeper than any pain the Painboy had inflicted, the realization that there was no end to this, no moment when he would be considered finished and released, just an indefinite continuation of modifications and experiments and improvements until he died or was killed or simply ceased to be anything recognizable. He was property now, not a person, but a medical project, and in the orc understanding of the word property, did not get to choose what happened to it. But fate, or the Emperor, or simple random chance decided to intervene in the form of explosions outside the workshop. The sound of heavy weapons fire, the distinctive crack of bolter rounds that could only mean one thing: Space Marines. The Imperium had sent a response force to Verdus Prime, and they were hitting the Orc positions with the kind of violence that only the Emperor's angels could deliver. The Painboy's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic, grabbing its power claw from a rack on the wall, the surgical instrument doubling as a close combat weapon, calling for the Gretchen to gather weapons and prepare for battle. "Finally, some good fightin'. Been stuck in here dockin' for days. Time to get stuck in proper. Come on, you gits. Let's show these beaky boys how orcs do things." The creature was excited, genuinely happy about the prospect of combat, the orc love of violence overriding any concern for medical duties or patient safety. The workshop emptied quickly as the Painboy and its assistants rushed toward the sounds of battle, leaving behind only the modified patients, those too damaged to walk or too far gone to care, and Theron, who found himself suddenly unsupervised for the first time since his capture. His first thought was escape. His second thought was how. His modified body was functional but barely. He could not run, could not fight, could not do anything except try to survive the next few seconds. Then he remembered Sister Maritha, the sister hospitaller who had been brought in 2 days earlier, or maybe 3 days. Time was still impossible to track. The Painboy had given her mechanical lungs after removing her damaged originals, had added extra arms for some reason the creature had never bothered to explain, and had left her in the corner opposite Theron's position. She had spoken to him once, whispered encouragement through the pain, telling him that survival was possible, that she had been here for weeks and was still sane, still human, still faithful to the Emperor despite everything that had been done to her. He found her where he had last seen her, propped against the wall, her multiple arms folded in what might have been prayer, or might have been simply the position that hurt least. Her mechanical lungs wheezed and clicked with each breath, the sound unsettling but functional, and when she saw him approaching, she smiled, an expression that seemed impossibly human on someone who had been modified so extensively. "The Emperor provides," she said, her voice carrying that calm that only the most faithful could maintain under such circumstances. "The Painboy is distracted. The workshop is unguarded. This is our chance, perhaps our only chance. We must take it even if we die in the attempt. Death in service of escape is better than life as property." Theron wanted to argue, wanted to say they should wait for a better opportunity, wanted to do anything except acknowledge that she was right, that this was their chance, and they had to take it now, or accept that they might never get another. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and together they began the painful process of crossing the workshop toward the door. Movement was agony for both of them, Theron's modified leg responding with too much strength, while his bionic arm flailed randomly, Sister Maritha's extra arms getting in her way despite her best efforts to coordinate them. They looked like broken puppets, like poorly designed machines, like anything except the trained Imperial servants they had been before the Painboy's attention. Outside the workshop, the battle was still raging, Space Marines in power armor advancing through Orc positions with methodical precision, bolter fire turning greenskins into exploding chunks of meat and bone, flamers clearing structures with cleansing fire. The Imperium's response to Orc infestation was always the same. Total destruction, no prisoners, no negotiations, just the absolute violence that the situation demanded. Theron and Sister Maritha moved through the chaos, trying to stay low, trying to avoid attention from either side. Two modified humans who no longer looked quite human enough to be immediately recognized as friendly. They saw the Painboy at one point, fighting with wild enthusiasm, its power claw tearing through a Space Marine's armor, and for a moment, Theron thought the creature would see them, would come after them, would drag them back to the workshop for punishment and more modifications. But the Painboy was too engaged in battle to notice, too focused on the joy of violence to care about escaped test subjects, and they managed to slip past while it was distracted by 3 assault marines who had targeted it specifically, apparently recognizing the threat that Mad Docs represented to overall Orc combat effectiveness. They found a crater, a recent impact site that provided temporary cover, and collapsed into it together, both too exhausted and damaged to go further without rest. From this position, they could see the full scope of the battle, hundreds of orcs being systematically eliminated by a chapter's worth of space marines supported by Imperial Guard units that must have been deployed from orbit. Verdus Prime was being cleansed, the orc infestation purged with fire and fury and the Emperor's judgment. A space marine appeared at the crater's edge, his armor the blue of the ultramarines, his bolter aimed down at them with deadly precision. For a moment, Theron thought they would die here, killed by friendly fire because they no longer looked human enough to be recognized as such, but the space marine hesitated, his helmet's sensors apparently detecting something that made him reconsider. "Identify yourselves," the Space Marine commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority that only the Emperor's angels possessed. "Sister Maritha, Order of the Valorous Heart, Hospitaller Division," the sister said immediately, her voice steady despite the mechanical wheeze of her lungs. "And Guardsman Theron Mast, Verdus Prime 23rd Infantry, both captured and modified by Orc Painboy, requesting extraction and medical assistance." The Space Marine was silent for several seconds, processing this information, consulting with someone over his Vox network, making decisions that would determine whether they lived or died in the next few moments. Finally, he lowered his bolter slightly. Not entirely, but enough to suggest he had decided they were not immediate threats. "Extraction authorized, medical personnel will assess your condition and determine appropriate treatment. Remain in position until transport arrives." The Space Marine moved on, returning to his squad to continue the purge, leaving them alone in the crater with their modifications and their pain and their impossible survival. The Thunderhawk that extracted them hours later was designed for Space Marines, not modified humans, and the ride back to orbit was rough enough that Theron thought the Painboy's work might simply shake apart under the stress. But the modifications held, proving that Orc medical science, crude and barbaric as it was, could produce results that functioned even under extreme conditions. Aboard the Imperial Navy ship in orbit above Verdus Prime, they were delivered to the Medici facility, where Mechanicus tech priests and biologist specialists examined them with the kind of professional horror that should have been reassuring, but was not. These were experts in human modification, in bionics and augmentation, and all the approved ways that flesh could be joined with machine. And what they saw in Theron and Sister Maritha was wrong, fundamentally wrong. Modifications that should not work but did. Techniques that violated every principle of proper augmentation, but had produced functional results anyway. "The procedures are crude but effective," one tech priest announced after several hours of examination, its voice carrying that flat mechanical quality that heavily augmented Mechanicus members developed. "The integration of foreign materials has bonded at cellular level in some cases. Removal would require extensive surgery with high probability of patient death. Recommendation is to maintain current modifications with selective improvements to address compatibility issues." Theron understood what this meant. The Orc modifications were permanent. He would carry them for the rest of his life. The bionic arm with its random functions and occasional honking. The reinforced leg that responded with too much strength. The metal plate welded to his skull that conducted heat and cold, and sometimes made his head ring like a bell. He was fixed, permanently fixed, and no amount of human medical science could unfix him without killing him in the process. Sister Maritha's fate was similar. Her mechanical lungs could be improved, but not replaced without catastrophic risk. Her extra arms were so thoroughly integrated that removing them would require removing significant portions of her torso. She was modified beyond any approved Imperial standard and would remain so indefinitely. They were given a choice, sort of. They could undergo the risky removal procedures and probably die. Or they could accept the modifications and be assigned to units where such changes would be useful rather than problematic. The choice was really no choice at all. death versus continued service, and both of them chose service because that was what soldiers did. They served until they could not serve anymore. They adapted to whatever situation the Emperor placed them in. They continued forward because stopping was not an option their training or faith allowed. Months later, Theron found himself assigned to a penal legion unit, not as punishment, but because the legion accepted modified soldiers that regular units would not. The Gut Rippers grotesques, they called themselves, with dark humor. A full squad of humans who had been captured by Painboys and modified and somehow survived. Each of them bore different modifications. One had legs that bent backward, another had skin partially replaced with metal plates. A third had been given orc teeth for reasons nobody could explain. They were a collection of orc medical experiments that had worked well enough that the Imperium decided to use them rather than waste them. Their assignments were the suicide missions that regular troops could not handle, insertion into toxic zones where their modified physiology gave them advantages over unmodified humans, combat situations where looking partially orc helped with infiltration, anywhere the Imperium needed soldiers who were already broken enough that breaking them further was difficult. They were effective, terrifyingly effective. The modifications that had been forced on them providing capabilities that trained soldiers could not match, and the Imperium was pragmatic enough to use any weapon that worked regardless of how unsettling that weapon might be. Theron adjusted to his new existence, learned to control the bionic arm well enough that it became almost natural, learned to use the spring-loaded leg as a tactical advantage rather than a liability, learned to live with the metal plate that protected his skull even as it marked him as something other than fully human. The modifications were a constant reminder of what he had survived, what he had lost, what he had become. Every time the arm's horn honked, he remembered the Painboy's workshop. Every time he jumped with the spring leg, he felt the table beneath him and heard the sound of bone being drilled. He saw Sister Maritha sometimes. She had been assigned to tend the grotesques, specifically because she understood what they had been through. Her extra arms made her more efficient at triage work. Her mechanical lungs allowed her to work in environments that would suffocate others, and she remained faithful, her devotion to the Emperor unshaken by everything that had been done to her. Sometimes in the quiet moments between missions, Theron thought about the Painboy, wondered if the creature had survived the battle on Verdus Prime, wondered if it was fixing other soldiers on other worlds, wondered if there were more modified humans out there carrying similar marks of orc medical attention. The thought should have been frightening, but was mostly just strange. The idea that there was an orc somewhere who probably thought of him fondly as a successful procedure, a test subject who had validated the Painboy's techniques and proven that human bodies could be modified in ways nobody had thought possible. The irony was not lost on him. The Painboy had been right. The modifications had made him stronger, more effective as a soldier, better at surviving situations that would kill normal humans. The creature had fixed him, had improved him, had turned a wounded guardsman into something that could serve the Emperor in ways that were otherwise impossible. The cost had been his humanity, or at least his appearance of humanity, but the Imperium did not care about appearance. It cared about function, and Theron Mast functioned better modified than he ever had unmodified. He tried not to think about the fact that this meant the Painboy had been a better doctor than most human physicians he had encountered, that orc medical science, brutal and crude as it was, had achieved results that Imperial medicine could not match. That sometimes the cruel answer was the effective answer, and effectiveness was all that mattered in a galaxy at war. These were dangerous thoughts. Thoughts that led to questioning and doubt and all the things that soldiers were trained not to do. So he pushed them down and focused on his duties and tried to find meaning in service, even when service meant being a walking example of what happened when you were fixed by an orc. Years passed. The grotesques survived missions that should have killed them, accumulated scars and medals and new modifications. Some from injuries, some from Imperial augmentation, some from encounters with other Painboys, because apparently, once you had been modified, once you became attractive to every mad dog who saw you, They recognized you as a successful project and wanted to add their own improvements, their own contributions to the ongoing process of turning baseline human into something more adaptable, more resistant, more functional. Theron learned to run when he saw green-skinned medics approaching with that gleam in their eyes, learned to avoid capture even more desperately than normal soldiers, because capture for him meant not death, but more procedures, more modifications, more fixing by creatures who thought they were helping. He became expert at recognizing Painboy tools at a distance, at identifying the smell of Orc medical facilities, at knowing when a battle was going badly enough that extraction was the only option. But he could not escape what had already been done. The bionic arm was his now, integrated so thoroughly that he thought with it as naturally as he thought with his organic limb. The reinforced leg carried him through battles that would have crippled normal men. The metal plate on his skull had saved his life at least 4 times from headshots that should have killed him instantly. He was Orc-fixed, permanently Orc-fixed. That fact shaped every aspect of his continued existence. The final mission came on a world whose name he never learned, fighting Orcs again because the Imperium sent the grotesques against Orcs whenever possible, apparently believing that modified soldiers were better suited for fighting the species that had modified them. The battle was going badly, his squad pinned down by Orc fire, when Theron saw it, a Painboy working its way through the battlefield, grabbing wounded Orcs and performing field procedures with that characteristic enthusiasm, and he recognized it, recognized the specific pattern of rust on its equipment, the way it moved, the sound of its voice as it shouted encouragement to its patients. Doc Gootripper, the Painboy who had fixed him years ago on Virtus Prime, still active, still working, still improving everyone it could get its massive hands on. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and for a moment everything else stopped. The Painboy recognizing him at the same instant, he recognized it. The creature's face split in what might have been a smile, might have been a snarl. Impossible to tell with Orc expressions. It waved, one massive hand rising in what looked like a friendly greeting, and then it shouted across the distance between them. "Oi, Dahumi, you're still working. Still got me arm. Told you it'd be good. Told you I'd fix you proper. Come back if you break. I'll fix you again. Got new ideas. Better ideas. You'll love it." Theron did not wave back, did not acknowledge the greeting beyond raising his bionic arm and using it to signal his squad to fall back, to extract, to get away from this place before the Painboy decided to come over and check on its handiwork. They retreated under covering fire, leaving the Orcs to their battle, and Theron tried not to think about the fact that part of him, a very small, very damaged part, had been almost happy to see the creature that had destroyed and remade him. The Painboy had fixed him, all right, fixed him permanently, and that was the true horror of it, not just what had been done, but the fact that it had worked, that the modifications made him better at his function even as they marked him as something wrong, that Orc medical science had achieved what Imperial medicine could not, and had done so through methods that were barbaric and cruel, and absolutely effective. He was fixed, would always be fixed, would carry these modifications until death finally claimed him, and maybe not even then. The Mechanicus had expressed interest in studying his body after death, in learning what they could from the successful integration of Orc bionics with human tissue, in perhaps applying those lessons to future Imperial augmentation programs. He would serve the Emperor in death as he had in life. His modified body, a lesson, a warning, a proof that sometimes survival meant becoming something other than what you started as. The bionic arm honked as he reached the extraction point, and somewhere in his mind he heard the Painboy's voice, cheerful and enthusiastic and genuinely proud of its work. "Fixed you proper, I did. Much better than before. You'll see. You'll see." And Emperor, help him, he did see, did understand in a way he wished he did not, that the Painboy had been right all along, that being fixed, however brutal the process, was better than being dead. That function mattered more than form, that survival justified almost any modification, that in the grim darkness of the far future, there was no such thing as too high a price to pay for continued service. He was fixed, permanently, completely, absolutely fixed, and he would carry that fix forward into whatever battles remained, whatever missions required the grotesques, whatever situations demanded soldiers who were already broken enough that breaking them further was impossible. The Painboy had fixed him, and in doing so had created something that could not be unfixed, could not be returned to normal, could only continue forward modified and marked and forever changed. Fixed, permanently fixed, and still fighting.